Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you very much for making me a professor. I'm only an assistant professor, but professor sounds good, so I'll keep it. So I'm very glad and very honored to be here today. That's my educational background, but nowadays what I do most is education. I'm a teacher, and I teach global health. And I am a teacher who really, really likes statistics, just like you said. And I'm into numbers and graphs. So I guess coming here to this place it's like heaven. I can teach you global health and I can use my graphs and you'll maybe like them. So teaching global health is trying to show you how health varies globally, how health varies in the world, how health varies between countries. And I will do that today, showing you only one graph. But I will also show you how health differs not only between countries, but within countries, between majority and minority populations. And knowing the background, knowing what things look like when it comes to health, is a good condition, or is a condition, to then start talk about integration. You need to have the basic facts first. So I said I would talk about health. What is health? Is health just the opposite of disease? The opposite of death? There is quite a clear WHO definition. Health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. I take it again. Health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. Have you ever been in perfect health, according to that definition? I have, once. Let me tell you when that was. It was actually my last few days in high school, just before I was to graduate. I was on my way to school, biking down a hill. The sun was in the air, the birds were singing. It was quite warm, and I was so happy. I knew it was really my last days of school. And as I was biking down this hill with the air in my hair, that was before I became an adult, started using a bike helmet, I really felt exactly like that definition. I was in perfect health. And then, at the bottom of the hill, there was this tiny little patch of gravel, you know, those little patches of gravel that are still there after the winter. And I didn't see it, so I was turning just where that patch was of gravel, and I slipped, and I fell, and I hurt my knee. Well, I didn't hurt myself that bad, but I scratched my bike. So I was really worried, what would my parents say? How was I to afford to fix the bike? And just like that, within less than 1 second, I lost my perfect state of health. Now I hope you have all yourself tried to remember when you were in perfect health. Anyone in perfect health tonight? No? Okay. Maybe that's sad. But how do we measure health? Should we measure it as just the absence of disease or death? Or should we try to go more for the WHO definition, which would be more something like the Gross National Happiness Index that is popular in Bhutan? Well, actually in global health we go for something in between. We use average life expectancy. And average life expectancy is an interesting measure. It is the average life expectancy of, let's take a baby born in Sweden today, in Stockholm today, maybe at Danderyd, where I spent half of my time. So we have a baby born today, and it's a girl, and this baby girl can expect to live on average 84 years if she's born today, which is pretty amazing, 84 years. 80 years if it's a boy, which is still pretty good. So the average life expectancy for Sweden is 82 years. Today, that is, for a baby born today, if all the conditions remain the same. Conditions never remain the same. We have technological improvements, we have, sometimes we have epidemics that strike, like the Spanish flu. We have amazing medical discoveries with new cures. But if everything remained the same today, that is what we call the average life expectancy. And it is quite a good measure of what type of health and healthcare we can offer the baby born in Sweden today. So with what we have today, on average, this little baby girl will live 84 years. So average life expectancy, that is. It's not a perfect measure. We don't know exactly that it is 84.03 in Sweden, but it's around there, plus minus. And when we want to see the big picture and we want to compare between countries, it's a good enough measure. So now I've introduced you to health and perfect health and how we measure health. Now it's time to show you my graph. You might have seen this graph before, because this is a Gapminder graph, and it has been shown by Hans Rosling, Ola Rosling, Anna Rosling, and the other Gapminder professionals before. But let me take you through it. And to do that, I need a stick to show you properly. So this is the whole world in one graph. On the vertical axis, we have average life expectancy. You can see it ranges from 50 all the way up to 80, up there, even 82.5. And then on this axis, on the horizontal axis, we have income per capita. So it goes all the way from 0 up to 100,000 on a log scale. And then we have all the bubbles here, which represents countries of the world. There are about 200 countries in the world. There are about 200 bubbles in this chart. So each bubble represents a country. And the size of the bubble represents the size of the population of the country. Big bubble means big population. And then we have the color of the bubble, which represents what region the country belongs to. And you have the green countries, you have the map over there so you can see, but you have all the green countries, they are the Americas. You have the yellow countries, European countries. The blue bubbles, they are African countries, and the red ones are Asian countries. And with these facts, you should be able to figure out the two big red bubbles, this one and this one, that they are India and China. So when we look at this, you can see that there's a clear relation between how rich a country is and how long people live in that country, how healthy they are in that country, right? Because there are no countries up here that live long and have no money. And there are no countries down here that have a lot of money, but that do not live long. So there's a clear relation between health and money, right? But to make it more comprehensible, when we show this graph, when we use it, we want to divide the world into categories. So we can talk about countries in the same category, we can compare it with countries in other categories. And before, in the old times, maybe what you learned in school, we talked about developing countries and developed countries. Can you draw a line here and tell me where that line is? When does a country cross the line of becoming a developed country? Is it here? Is it here? Is it here? Can't really say, can you? There's no really intuitive way of doing it, is it? So we don't use the terms developing and developed anymore. But somehow this terminology has been so popular that it has stuck. And you will meet it everywhere, even within global health. People still use it. But in official terms, the World Bank, for instance, they don't use it anymore. So hopefully more and more we're going to leave this terminology behind. Instead, what we do is we use World Bank income categories. And when we do that, all the countries that have an income above $12,500 become high-income countries. 1 billion people live in high-income countries. And here, you find a big green bubble, that's the US, a big red bubble, Japan, and most of the yellow bubbles, European countries. Then, we have the upper middle-income countries with 2.5 billion people. How many people are there in the world? About 7. So 2.5 billion people live in upper middle income countries. And here we can find a country like China. And then we come to the lower middle income countries, where another 2.5 billion people live. And here you can find a country like India. And finally, the last billion live in low income countries, where you find a country like the Democratic Republic of Congo. So 4 categories. And most of the people, most of the 7 billion, 5 billion, they live in the middle. There's 1 billion up there, high income. There's 1 billion down here, low. But most people live in the middle. Okay, but you can also see that even though there are clear differences between the categories, there are also differences within each category. So you can take a country in a lower middle income category here, like Vietnam, and compare it to Nigeria down here. They have almost the same income, but very different life expectancies. So I said there's a clear relation, but it seems to be important what you do with the money that you have. So just to show you the average life expectancy in low-income countries, it's 61. In lower middle, 67. In upper middle, 74. And in high-income countries, 81. So very close to the Swedish average. And Sweden is one of the, it's actually the yellow bubble up there. It's 82. And now, you have the world in front of you. Now what we're going to do, we're going to look at countries and within countries and compare majority and minority populations. So let's see. Let's start with the US. In the US there are quite a few minorities, but we'll only take a look at the indigenous population of the US. And the US, the average life expectancy in the US is 79 years. The indigenous population in the US has a life expectancy of 74. It's about 5 years lower. Is this typical only for the US? Let's take a look at a few other high-income countries with minority populations. First, we can take a look at Denmark, our neighboring country, which has within the Kingdom of Denmark, you can find the autonomous country of Greenland, which is a huge island in the Arctic. And about 1% of the population in all of Denmark lives in Greenland, and most of them are Inuit. Life expectancy in Denmark is 80, and in Greenland, it's 72. So 8 years difference. Finally, take a look at Australia. In Australia, we have the same life expectancy as in Sweden, it's 82. And the indigenous population of Australia, it's 10 years less. So we have 10 years of a difference here. So why do, even though we have Australia, we have Denmark, we have the US, why do the indigenous populations of these countries live much shorter than the majority populations? They're very tiny parts of the countries in a whole. They make up 1 to 3% of the population. But why do they live so much shorter? There seems to be something happening with integration into modern life. There seems to be consequences of it. So if you go to look to see what the causes of disease and death are in these indigenous populations, you will find out that the rates of alcohol-related diseases are much higher in the indigenous populations, and also that suicide rates are much higher in indigenous populations. There also seems to be diseases related to too little integration. And that is, what do I mean by that, too little integration? With that I mean infant mortality, child mortality, is somewhat higher in indigenous populations than it is in the majority populations. And this is because lack of proper access to healthcare. It's not much higher, but it is higher in all these 3 indigenous populations. So too much or too little integration? Okay, we looked at high-income countries. Now let's take a look at upper middle-income countries. And I'll keep the US as a reference. And for upper middle income countries, I choose Romania instead of China because Romania has a minority that has become quite well known to us here in Sweden. Romania has the Roma as a minority. And the Roma, they constitute about 3% of the Romanian population. Many of the Roma, or quite a few, have, in search of a better life, come to Sweden. So therefore, they're quite well known to us. So how is life expectancy for the Roma? Let me first tell you, it's not easy to find data on these things. That's my job. I try to find data every day for different types of health statistics. But when it comes to looking for minorities, it's not easy. And why is that? Is it because governments don't want to know? Well, in some cases, maybe yes. But also, to collect data on minorities, the person who identifies as belonging to a minority must also report that he belongs to this minority when the data is collected. And in many cases, this is not happening. So it's quite a lot of underreporting going on. Anyhow, Romania has a life expectancy of 75. The Roma, about 10 years less. And reflecting all the social, or the cultural, or the educational differences between the Roma population and the majority population in Romania. What about lower middle income countries? Here we'll go for India. And in India, there are so many different minorities, and hundreds of them. And they actually call themselves, a lot of them, they belong to something called scheduled tribes. And sometimes when we talk about tribes, we think that that's something of the past, colonial, but this is the official name, scheduled tribes. There are big scheduled tribes like the Gujarati with several million people belonging to them, and there are small scheduled tribes with only a few hundred members. And the life expectancy of the scheduled tribes is not that low, actually. It's about, comparing to India, which is 67, it's about 63 to 64, so 3 to 4 years less. And I did not find, when I looked through all the data, I did not find any country with a life expectancy lower than that. And then, finally, let's go to low-income countries and look at Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I choose Congo. Congo is close to my heart. I worked there as a doctor several years ago, and I really got to see with my own eyes the reason why the life expectancy in Congo is only 58. We have a high maternal mortality. Mothers die. It's horrible. Mothers die. Children die from diseases that are easily treatable. Life expectancy is 58. In Congo, there are also many, many, many minorities. And some of them live in the rainforest. One of them is a group called the Efe Pygmies, or the Efe people. And the life expectancy, now we're not talking about data, now we're talking about estimations or observations of people who have lived with Efe Pygmies, is, well, somewhere down here. I think actually it's rather down there, but I couldn't fit that into my graph. So it's here. It's probably about 30 to 35, so more than 20 years less than the life expectancy of Congo. So now that we have, this is my final graph. Now that we have it all in front of us, what conclusions can we draw? What can we see when we have this in front of us? Well, first of all, if we'll take a look at the countries, the high-income countries and the upper middle-income countries, we see that we have these big differences between minority and majority populations, with up to 10 years difference in life expectancy, right? You can also see that it seems like in lower middle-income countries, these differences are not as big, because most people have access to basic healthcare and going to school, when taking India as an example at least. There are still differences, but they're not as big. Here, the majority populations have access to the best form of healthcare. And then we have a life expectancy like this. And finally, the life expectancy of the Efe Pygmies, 30 to 35. Sometimes we tend to talk about people living in the rainforest as, we romanticize. They live in ecological balance with the nature. It's fantastic. And then you take a look at this, and what you see is that they do not live in ecological balance with nature, they die in ecological balance with nature. Child mortality of 40%. More than half, sometimes, of the children do not ever reach adult age. So, what we also can maybe not see in this picture, but what we know from history is that all the countries in the lower middle, upper middle, and high-income countries, what they have done is that as they have become richer and healthier, they have taken the minorities with them. So the health of the minorities have become better at the same time as the health of the majority populations. And actually, as the countries have become richer, the gap has become smaller. And there is no example of a country that first achieved perfect equal health for everyone and then started to rise. All these countries have been rising with some people having a better health and some people having lower health, but rising together. And my take-home message is I would like you to keep two thoughts in your mind at the same time, if you can do that. First of all, it's horrible that we have these 10-year differences still. There are differences between minorities and majorities. They're still there, they're clear. You've seen them. But there is no minority in all these three income groups that has a lower life expectancy than the average life expectancy of low-income countries. Than the average. So don't forget the low-income countries. So keep this spectrum in your heads, and that will make my day as a teacher. Thank you very much.